And so let's talk about India since you're in India and elections are happening and the electoral result will be out on 4th of June. How do you see India's economic performance on economic parameters, and how do you see the elections and Prime Minister Narendra Modi as the next Prime Minister of India again?
Well, yes, it certainly looks overwhelmingly that he's going to have another 5 years. Eurasia Group projections are 305 seats plus or minus 10, which is pretty consistent with where Modi was last time around. In other words, not an awful lot to see here. Stability, a little boring, support for continued strong economic growth, and a pretty vibrant economy that is attracting a lot of investment from around the world. You call it China plus one. The Americans call it nearshoring, friendshoring, de-risking, whatever you want to call it. It's good for India.
When you think about India, India's economy, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi?
Stable.
Welcome. You're watching a special broadcast brought to you by Republic Business and Republic Media Network. Or you're watching a very special broadcast in which we have a very special guest, well-known political scientist and the president of Eurasia Group, Mr. Ian Bremmer. So, Mr. Bremmer, thank you for joining us and sparing out your time and speaking to Republic Media Network. And welcome to India, sir.
Sure.
Sir, I just want to begin by asking you a very first important question. And I was reading your commentary on the various geopolitical situation so far. And you commented that 2024 is a Voldemort of years. You said that we are living in an era of geopolitical recession. So we are almost halfway through this year as far as 2024 is concerned. What is your assessment of the months that are gone by? And how do you see the upcoming months going forward?
What I see is an absence of global leadership, making the major challenges that we have geopolitical around the world getting worse. So, I mean, you look at the war, Russia-Ukraine, and the trajectory so far this year has gone against Ukraine. The war is not coming to a close. It's becoming more challenging for the West and for the world. I look at the war in the Middle East, and I see it getting worse on the ground in Gaza and more broadly in the Middle East. It's not getting better in the region or for the world. I also look at the US-China relationship, and it is being better managed than it has been, but still conflict and tensions between the US and China on trade, certainly, as well as on technology. And in the broader confrontation and escalation in the South China Sea and Taiwan, getting worse. And then finally, in my own country, US elections, where we have a crisis in democracy right now, the level of confrontation between those that support Biden and those that support Trump also growing. So unfortunately, I fear that 2024 is largely playing out the way we had expected.
Okay. And since you also talked about US and China relationship, and you also commented that it's more stable than you might think now. But in last few days, we have seen that US has slapped some tariff on China, like its EV or semiconductor is concerned. Do you think that this is the beginning of a trade war? And how do you see this move by the US slapping tariffs on China?
The US-China relationship we would describe as one of managed decline, and the focus has fortunately been more about management than decline, but both are happening. And so you're right, these 18 billion in tariffs, including 100% on Chinese electric vehicles to the US, which will not be matched by the Europeans, but they will move in that direction in the coming days and weeks. That is a hit to the US-China relationship. The move against TikTok and the demand that ByteDance divest the Chinese ownership, that is a hit. The $2 billion in military aid to Taiwan, that's a hit to the relationship. The new tariffs on steel, the new investigation on Chinese shipbuilding, all of those things are making the relationship more troubled. Now, that is not a Cold War. It's not even a trade war. The Americans refer to this as de-risking. That's the term of art that's being used. But more broadly, it is an effort to avoid crisis, because the Americans see that the crises in the Middle East and Europe, Ukraine, are more than sufficient, and the Americans don't want a third. And the Chinese, their economy, of course, is performing badly. That is moving them towards a charm offensive to try to limit capital flight and attract more foreign direct investment. And also geopolitically, China's position in Asia has been deteriorating for years now, in Southeast Asia, as well as in Northeast Asia. The Japan-South Korea relationship and the greater alignment of the Philippines, Vietnam, even Indonesia towards the United States and its allies. For all of these reasons, the US-China relationship continues to be better managed than many other confrontational relationships around the world.
Right. And sir, since you mentioned about the de-risking of a supply chain from China, I also just want to understand from you, because we have been seeing the change in stance, because earlier we were talking about decoupling of supply chain, and now we have moved on to de-risking of supply chain. How do you see the change in stance from decoupling to de-risking?
Well, two things. The first is that most of the American private sector doesn't want to decouple. And they are powerful. They have regulatory influence. They're special interests that give a lot of money to their local congressmen. They lobby effectively. The financial industry, certainly the insurance industry, certainly a lot of entertainment, the sports industry, Hollywood. I mean, you talk to big CEOs in the United States, they're making more trips to China in the last 6 months, not fewer. So that matters. And also, when you look at other countries around the world, there's almost nobody that wants to decouple. There are members of Congress that might talk about decoupling, but America's allies around the world, whether in Europe or in Asia, or certainly in the developing world, they do not want to decouple. And, the Indians were well in advance of the United States in cutting off Chinese apps. But the trade between India and China is, of course, incredibly robust, and nobody's trying to end that. And it's very hard to have a Cold War if nobody else wants to fight it. And that is the environment we're presently in. The global economy is not a bilateral order. It's not a unilateral order. It's actually a multipolar order with the United States, China, the European common market, and then Japan becoming a little less important, India becoming more important. That's a multipolar order. The Americans and the Chinese by themselves are not going to determine the outcome of that order.
Right. And sir, also we heard a very unfortunate news where Iranian president passed away in a plane crash. How do you see this situation? And you also said that this complicates a supreme problem. So how do you decode the situation, and what would be the possible ramifications of this incident?
Well, it's not clear that the Iranians see it as such a misfortune. They don't see their president as legitimate. Their choices of who to vote for are determined by the Guardians Council and ultimately the supreme leader. He's a hardliner. He used to run the judiciary. He's personally responsible for the execution of thousands of political prisoners and has been supporting a greatly repressive system that strips away rights from Iranians, especially young Iranians and Iranian women. So, I mean, frankly, I suspect that there would be a lot of celebration and demonstrations in favor of the death of the Iranian president if there wasn't such great repression and punishment to be meted by the government against those people. But leaving that aside, the reality is the president is not the ultimate power in Iran. It is the supreme leader. He is an 85-year-old cleric in poor health. A lot of rumors that he has advanced prostate cancer. And so, I mean, even though you will have a new presidential election within 50 days for someone that will be seen as equally illegitimate, equally loyal to the supreme leader in the IRGC, the military there, ultimately, the nature of the Iranian regime is not going to change all that much.
And sir, also one risk that you have been highlighting across various platforms is ungoverned AI. How do you see the advent of AI, and what is the cause of worry as far as AI is concerned for you?
Well, first of all, the fact that the technology is moving so exponentially fast, much faster than Moore's law, in terms of what these large language models are capable of doing and how much human beings are willing, are interested, are desirous of interacting with them given those capabilities. Also, the fact that the technology and the companies that are driving the technology are moving a lot faster than the governments and the ability to govern them. And so, we are seeing, for example, you just had with, OpenAI, the people that were leading the safety protocols have just quit. And they've quit saying that the people that are running the organization don't care enough about safety. There has been an effort to move as fast as humanly possible to build more and stronger artificial intelligence, moving even towards artificial general intelligence, which the AI community believes is likely to be in place around 2032, 2034. In other words, almost an eye blink from a human scale. And they're doing that without thinking about the consequences because everybody else is doing it. They're doing it because there's so much money, because the field is so competitive, and because they don't want to lose out. It's very human in understanding that. It's a collective action problem, but it's one that the world is unprepared to govern given the scale and also the quickness of how this technology moves.
Okay. And so we also know that that 70% of the world population is going for election this year, and this is historical in that sense. US is also heading for polls, and as far as back home in India is also going for polls. What kind of what kind of president US needs now, considering the situation? Mr. Biden is also there. Mr. Trump is there. What is, according to you, is the best candidate for the presidential race in US?
Well, ideally, it would be someone a lot younger, a lot more in touch with the population, a lot more capable of running the country for 4 years, a lot more fit, a lot less indicted, a lot less corrupt, a lot less authoritarian leaning. There's almost no one in the United States that really is happy about the quality of these two candidates this time around. They're very different candidates. Biden's problem is largely about his age. Trump's problem is largely about his unfitness. But there's no agreement in the US about that. Both political parties think of the other party as trying to destroy American democracy. There's two pieces of good news. One is that most of the rest of the world going to the polls this year, your country, India, Indonesia, very populous democracy, Mexico on June 2, the European Union for their parliament, the largest common market in the world. None of those elections are going to be unstable. They will all be seen as free and fair and have legitimate transitions, unlike my own country. So the US is kind of a unique challenge among major democracies in the world today. Unfortunately, it's also, of course, the most powerful, so it causes a lot of uncertainty. But the second piece of good news is that even though the US is a democracy in crisis, it is not a democracy facing civil war. It is not a democracy in danger of becoming a dictatorship. It is eroding. It is losing legitimacy. It is becoming more of a hybrid system. It is less representative than it used to be. And that will likely continue to be the case after people go to the polls in November in this year. But for those that are concerned, I saw Ray Dalio, the American billionaire, who said there was a 1 in 3 chance that America was going to become civil war. That's also fake news. That's someone who's trying to generate clicks for excitement and titillation, but doesn't actually reflect the situation on the ground in the United States.
Right. And so let's talk about India, since you're in India, and India's elections are happening and the electoral result will be out on 4th of June. How do you see India's economic performance on economic parameters, and how do you see the elections and Prime Minister Narendra Modi as the next Prime Minister of India again?
Well, yes, it certainly looks overwhelmingly that he's going to have another 5 years. Eurasia Group projections are 305 seats, plus or minus 10. Which is pretty consistent with where Modi was last time around. In other words, not an awful lot to see here. Stability, a little boring, support for continued strong economic growth, and a pretty vibrant economy that is attracting a lot of investment from around the world. You call it China +1. The Americans call it nearshoring, friendshoring, de-risking, whatever you want to call it. It's good for India. And it's not only good for India economically, it's also good for India because India as a government and as a country is trying to be a leader for the global South, but also a bridge to the West, and is even trying to stabilize their relationship with China to a degree. So in other words, you see India's rise being aligned with greater friendship with more countries around the world, something that is in short supply geopolitically right now and something that is widely welcomed.
Right. And so, last question, which country do you think is the superpower now, and who is the most powerful person across the world as of now?
There are no superpowers in the world today. A superpower is a country that can project its influence around the world in every area of power, militarily, economically, technologically. The United States is the only country that can do that in terms of global security. But in the global economic order, it's a multipolar order with the United States, Europe, and China. Also, Japan receding somewhat, India rising somewhat. That's a multipolar order. But when we talk about the digital world and new technologies, it's largely private sector technology companies that are acting as sovereigns in that space. So it's a much more complicated world than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, geopolitically. The most powerful person in the world, I mean, you know, someone like Xi Jinping, who controls the second largest economy globally, much less powerful than the United States, but much fewer checks and balances on his power and his ability to rule for a long time with the kind of decisions that he prefers. You'll remember zero COVID was extended with great damage to the Chinese economy and great irritation to the Chinese people because Xi Jinping wanted it to be. And when he decided he wanted to change that policy, he was able to do that overwhelmingly in a week. There's no other person in the world that could do that. So I'm not sure whether you consider it a good thing or a bad thing that he has that much individual power in his hands, but it certainly, I think, is a thing that we are contending with geopolitically.
And so, last question, one word that comes to your mind when you think about India, India's economy, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi?
Stable.
Stable. Thank you so much, sir, for talking to Republic Media Network and sparing out your valuable time. Thank you once again.
Happy to be with you.